Hey there, and welcome to the Dynamics Hot Dish Podcast, serving up stories and knowledge on Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform. This is what's hot in Dynamics. You're now joining Merlin Schweiger, Liz McGlennon, and Ashley Steiner.
Because I haven't been to the gym in a year, I've decided that my arms need to be in better shape. And so Tom and I are doing this 100 push-up challenge thing.
Okay.
Sounds terrible.
Is that just like do 100 push-ups?
It's do 100 push-ups every day for a month.
Do you have to do them like at the same time, or can you break
No,
it
you just do however many you can do at a time. So like yesterday, I was doing like 10 at a time, but I only made it to 60. And I'm really sore. And I'm like, I don't know if I can do this.
I can't even do one push-up like on my feet.
Because I wasn't sore yesterday and I couldn't do 100, and now everything just kills. I don't know how I haven't done any today, so I have to do 100 in half a day.
Better get cracking.
I know.
I just started going back to the gym too, and I'm very it was painful to walk up and down my stairs to my basement yesterday.
That's fun.
Hurt less when I didn't go to the gym. So what are we talking about today, guys? I think we're talking about CDS or Dataverse, as everyone is now calling it. Just makes me think of Spider-Man. Doesn't it make you guys? Because like the multiverse, Dataverse, I don't know. It makes me crack up every time.
Yeah, same idea. I like it.
Yeah, totally.
Do you think the new name is better? Like, how do you guys feel about the name change?
I mean, it's certainly like catchier from a brand perspective, but I don't know. I don't know that it needed to be catchy. I feel like Microsoft has a history of just naming things exactly what they are. Like for the longest time, CRM was called just Microsoft CRM. That seems easy, but I have no idea. I think it's fine.
Go ahead, Liz. Sorry.
I was going to say, like, I think it's definitely catchier.
I think it's catchier, but I don't think it does anything to better explain what it is, if that makes sense. Like, it doesn't, like to Merlin's point with the CRM, like you knew that Microsoft CRM was a CRM system, but like Dataverse, like when I first heard it, I thought of Spider-Man, so
right.
It was a catchy, fun name, but was it actually helpful in explaining better what it was and what it does for people?
Yeah, it's definitely not descriptive. Like Common Data Service is actually, like the name is explaining what it is. Also, there's that Harvard project thing that's also called Dataverse. So when you Google stuff like that, sometimes pops in.
Yeah. I was just Googling it this morning. I was like, the first 4 results are all the Harvard thing. And then it's like, oh, Microsoft Dataverse. Oh, right, of course.
Yeah, I think you need to search for Microsoft Dataverse or Dataverse in CDS still together.
Does anyone know if that's going to be like a copyright issue? I didn't, because I heard that some people like MVPs were talking about it when it first came out, like, oh, they might have to change the name because they didn't know about this other project or whatever. But I just wondered if you guys thought.
They already did that once. So I don't know if you recall, but at what was it, Inspire? I think it was after the Inspire conference or at the Inspire or Ignite, or I don't know. I can't keep track of which conference.
Sometime this last summer.
Right. Last summer, they renamed it to DataFlex. And then that, I think, was a copyright problem.
Okay.
So that's why it was DataFlex for like 3 weeks. And then it dropped and they weren't DataFlex anymore. And then it was just back to Common Data Service for a little while until they came out with Dataverse. So I think they're probably good on Dataverse. They probably worked something out with Harvard, or Harvard doesn't care, or I don't know. Maybe they don't have copyright claims on it or something. I have no idea.
It would be nice to keep it consistent, just because like so many things are coming out new in Dynamics in the Microsoft world that sometimes when they change names, like it's hard to know, like, okay, is it exactly like it was before, or have they made changes to it to make it more versy? I don't know what the Dataverse part of it is supposed to be, but you know what I'm saying. So it's like, does it completely 100% replace CDS, or does it add additional things? So I think that keeping the name consistent would be helpful, just from an end user standpoint.
That's fair. They'll probably stick with the Dataverse name for at least the foreseeable future. And I think what they're going for is data and universe mashed together, so it is the universe of your data, right, all in one spot, which is still somewhat descriptive. It's not as boring or as basic as Common Data Service, but I don't know. You get your universe of your data all in one spot.
It looks great on marketing material.
It does look nice on marketing materials, yeah.
So tell me more about how you guys like use Dataverse and what it's commonly used for. As an admin, I would have to say I only really touch it when I do customizations, configurations. In concept, I understand it, but I would say it's kind of out there a little bit.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Liz, do you want to take a first stab at this, or should I go?
Yeah, I can. So I think about it as it's really just the new XRM. So if you've been in the CRM D365 space for a while, you're probably familiar with the idea of it's configurable, it's customizable, and you can build in processes and add tables or entities that aren't there natively. And so you don't have to use it for the standard sales, marketing, service, field service processes. Like you can use it for anything. You can use it for a library to track books or a nonprofit to track maybe an animal rescue and dogs. And so it can be used for non-traditional things. And it's really just XRM. So if you're building a custom table or entity and adding new relationships, like that is CDS, that is Dataverse. So if you've done configuration work in D365 in CRM, it's all the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I was excited, I think, when they first sort of released the idea of Common Data Service a few years ago, that it's like, for those of us who've grown up in the CRM space, it's our database. It's the CRM database. All the names of everything is exactly the same. So I feel like, oh, well, I'm looking for this field for the address information. Oh, it's still address 1_ state or province, right? Like I already know all the schema names because they're all exactly the same as what I've been used to.
Yeah, and all the default tables or entities are the ones we're used to from CRM. Yeah.
Yeah, although they do keep adding them, which is kind of, I don't know, it's handy because obviously the default CRM database didn't include everything.
Right. And I guess that's how I consider the CDS Dataverse world, is just, it was the back end of what I knew to be CRM, right? As a CRM admin, that's been my focus. And so that's kind of how I understood it. What other things plug into it or make it, more useful to people? Because it's not just Dynamics anymore, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, I think the other part of it is that historically all the Dynamics software, they were separate applications. So you had CRM, you had AX, you had NAV, and obviously GP and SL, which we don't really care about anymore. But part of CDS was to bring those together. And I know like this is something that Microsoft has been talking about for a long time, and we're still not quite there yet. But the vision is that they're not separate databases, they're not separate software systems, that you have, the full D365 suite with the CE and the F&O apps together, and bringing those together instead of having two separate CRM and ERP systems that you have to build like a custom integration for. So I think it just contributes to that vision, and it's a critical point to making that happen.
Mm-hmm. As I understand it, maybe, I don't know, probably 20 years ago at this point, Microsoft had this grand vision that was called Project Greenfield, which was bring all the applications together into the single database. And for whatever reason, I assume mostly the technology wasn't quite there yet. It didn't really get off the ground then. So I'm sure this was just like, has always been in the back of the Microsoft mind as like, this is a thing that people would like. And now they've got the technology to actually make it happen. And I think, so a lot of the core elements are all the CRM things that we know and love, like I'm going to say all the entity and attribute names, but all the table and column names, now that we've reverted back to essentially SQL database language again, are all the same, but then they've added on to it to include more data elements that apply to other aspects of the business. So financial aspects, I don't know, they sort of added a lot of other, I would say, generic data elements into Dataverse so that you can, without having to create new tables, you can plug in data from other systems that are not and have never been native to like a CRM application. And then that all kind of together forms the common data model, which I don't think they've renamed that, but maybe nobody's really talking about that anymore either. So it's just all in Dataverse. And then one of the things that I actually had to do some research on this because I remember back after they'd released Common Data Service, they for a while had like two separate ones. There was like CDS for apps and CDS for analytics. I don't know if you guys remember that, but they were like making it sound like you had two different common data services at the time, which again lasted all of a hot minute. But it seems like what the CDS for analytics was an Azure Data Lake. And now Dataverse has the built-in capability to dump your data into a managed data lake for you. And so if you want to do the analytics or like the AI or trending over time sorts of things, you set that up and then it feeds everything into the data lake. And now you can do reports out of the data lake to give you kind of snapshots over time instead of just the real-time information that you get out of Dataverse itself.
Merlin, what's a data lake?
It's a magical cloud database thing that keeps snapshots of structured and unstructured data and somehow magically turns it into something that makes sense. I will admit that I do not obviously know the underpinnings of a data lake. But the idea is you can feed almost anything into a data lake, and it does a good job of keeping track of what you have fed it and taking snapshots of data. So it's essentially, for the purposes of Dataverse, the data lake is keeping snapshots over time so that you can see trends in your data instead of just real time, what is it today?
So it's for reporting, it's for analytics.
Right. And also for AI, right?
Sure.
Because if you want to plug any of the AI or insight stuff in there, it also needs to be able to look at trends to figure out what's coming next.
Isn't there something else like a data estate, or am I making that up? I think there was something else like that. Or was that old?
Are you thinking of like the data exporter?
I don't know. Never mind. I thought there was something similar, like above a data lake.
I mean, maybe.
Okay, never mind.
I was going to say the whole idea of a data lake, that's like super fascinating to me as like somebody who's solely used Dynamics CRM, right? Like I haven't ventured into like the nav, the AX world, anything like that, because you can't do any sort of trending. It's difficult. I shouldn't say you can't. It's very difficult to do like trending reporting in Dynamics. Like, you know, as people are entering like their sales numbers or opportunities, things like that, you can't see over time like how their funnel has grown or changed, or that's a really simplistic example, I think, of what you're talking about. But I think that is an interesting concept, and it sounds like the Dataverse makes that kind of stuff a lot easier for people to.
Yeah, you don't have to like do the workflow to create the historical record every week, or you know what I think most people do, which is run a report every week and then put it in an Excel spreadsheet and then add to the spreadsheet next week. And there, I've got a trend.
Right.
Yeah.
And that'd be pretty cool, because I'm guessing that because it's all Dataverse and Microsoft, you can plug it into Power BI and get your BI reporting.
Yeah, exactly. So I made a little list of like all the stuff the Dataverse gives you in case this is of value. Because it's like, it is the way that I wrote this down. It's like, okay, so this is just our old CRM database turned into a generic cloud database, but you get actually more than you would get with just a database, right? Because you could spin up like an Azure SQL server. That would be a database in the cloud. And then you could put some data in it, but you'd have to do everything by hand, and you'd probably want to be or have access to a DBA. Whereas Dataverse gives you all those same capabilities. And then also you get security, because it uses the same role-based security that CRM has used all these years. And so you get the same role-based security model, you get sharing with that, you get business rules, you get still the workflow engine, which I noticed the documentation now is pointing out that the workflow engine is for real-time workflows. And if you want background processes, then you go to Power Automate. So they're starting to sort of make that distinction in the documentation.
That's actually kind of nice that they're finally taking a stand on it, though, because I think from our perspective, it was always like, okay, well, when is that switch going to happen? So
Right.
it's kind of nice to know that some of that is occurring in the documentation, at least.
It's starting to show up. You obviously get your drag and drop config, and that drag and drop config is creating new tables and new fields. In addition to, if you're feeding that into a UI with a model-driven app, which just sits right there on top of your Dataverse. I didn't actually think about this, but you also get the CRM charts. So like that native out-of-the-box charting capability, and what they're now calling the paginated reports, which essentially is the reporting services reports that we've been using for, 20 years now. So I think you get the report wizard to do that. You obviously get automated disaster recovery, so backups, replication. If California falls into the Pacific Ocean, your data is automatically replicated into New Jersey or wherever. You've got global deployment options, because of course Microsoft has data centers all over the globe. And now that it's all sitting in Azure, you can basically deploy it anywhere that Azure is available, as opposed to historically where the dynamic stuff was still kind of separate. It had its own data centers. You've obviously got all the native links to all your other Power Platform stuff, and your CRM data already sits in there, and your F&O data can already sit in there too, as long as you set up the data integrator, which seems like Microsoft is also building their own data integration platform for the cloud in addition to Power Automate. I'm not actually sure.
Does the Dataverse make it easier to integrate? So let's say you're not using the full suite of the Dynamics products, you're using a different ERP or financial system. Does the Dataverse make it easier to do an integration because that is cloud hosted instead of just sitting in the back end of your CRM?
I would say yes. I mean, I feel like the integration conversation with CRM over the years, at least from my perspective, has always been, it's super easy, right? Like integrating with CRM has always been super easy because it's got an API. The API can do everything. It's got all the capabilities that you could possibly need. It's fast, it's functional. And so my conversation was always, integration relies on the limitations of the other system, right? And not on Dynamics. And so extending that into Dataverse, you've got essentially the same thing. You've got the same API, you have the same capabilities. Integrating into Dataverse from an API perspective, piece of cake. And then you add on the fact that you can integrate to it with Power Automate and connectors through that. You can, plug it into your Azure Data Factory or your Enterprise Service Bus or whatever else. So I would say, yes, integrating into Dataverse is way easier. And as I was looking into the data integrator thing, which you still need to turn on for F&O, they're also looking to expand its capabilities to work with some of the other connectors too. So they've already got a preview connector for SQL and a preview connector for Salesforce. And they listed 20 plus others that they're planning to get running so that you could, without writing any code, without the need for any sort of development, essentially plug and play with templates, connect some other system straight into Dataverse, which I think that's pretty powerful. That really opens the door to a lot of solutions.
Absolutely. Because I think about it from the perspective of being a Dynamics person. I haven't gotten into the BC and AX world as much. I guess it's F&O. I'm not sure.
D365.
D365. Yeah. I haven't expanded outside of the sales marketing service type area. So it's hard for me to conceptualize what Dataverse could be helpful for outside of that world. So it's interesting to hear how it can make it easier if you are using the whole stack.
Mm-hmm. Well, using AX F&O as an example. I haven't actually seen its database, but I understand that the F&O database has something like 30,000 tables in it. Like apparently the database schema is an absolute nightmare. But if you can just take that data and push it out into Dataverse into the common data model entities and use report from, like view it there, I have to imagine it's a lot easier. And I mean, think about the benefits of taking all of your sort of disparate systems and pushing all of that data into one common format. Now the people that you've trained on how to build Power BI reports don't need to know all the different database schemas to pull the right information or the right field. It's all there and it's got, common names.
So Merlin, like using that example, how is that different than like our regular data warehouse? Like so many organizations have a data warehouse and that's your central hub to grab all your data. How is it different then, or is it similar?
I would say it's pretty similar. I think if you already have a data warehouse that's already pulling data from all your different systems, Dataverse might be somewhat redundant. But I think the benefit comes in if you don't already have one, then it should be faster and easier to use Dataverse and the connectors and push your data in there, as opposed to sort of reinventing it or building it from scratch on your own as a data warehouse. But I think even if you have a data warehouse, you might find some benefit with kind of over time replacing it with Dataverse, because then you get all the links to all the other stuff, right? So now instead of having to pull data by hand or build the query by hand to pull that data out into a Power BI report, you've got a built-in connector. Or you want to build a Power App, well, this is already in the cloud and it's already got the connector. And I think another good example is if you make changes, if you're using the Dynamics sales product and you make changes to fields, like you add some more fields or you add a couple extra tables, that schema change is already replicated to Dataverse. Whereas if you have your own on-prem data warehouse and you start making schema changes, then you got to get whoever's in charge of the data warehouse to go and make those schema changes in the warehouse too, and then update the jobs that pull the data in to make sure that they're pulling that new data. And so there's a lot more potential for manual steps.
So I have a question that does pertain to that, because in looking at like a data warehouse, you can connect non-dynamic stack products into it. And is that as easy to do with Dataverse if you're using an outside of the Dynamics 365 tool?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so the dynamic stuff plugs in obviously out of the box. But even like I mentioned, that data integrator product has a preview connector for Salesforce already. So I presume with that connector, it's also got some default templates. So you could just, I'm using Salesforce and I want to put my data into Dataverse so I can build a Power App on it. That connector should already be there and you could just plug it in, make it go.
Sounds pretty cool. I mean, it makes it sound super easy, but it's one of those things where is it actually as easy as you make it sound? Like, is it something that me or a functional person could actually use and work on outside of the like XRM part of it that Liz was talking about? Like the integration.
I bet you could. I mean,
you might be overestimating my abilities, Merlin.
I think as with anything that is built to be easy to use, it probably works very well in some use cases, and in others, you might still need a developer or a DBA or somebody to help out, right? Like, it'll probably work for 60% of what you want to do with it, and maybe the other 40% is a little too complicated for the drag and drop, but it really depends.
Can we talk about Dataverse for Teams?
That's a good idea.
Because I think that's exciting for the small businesses. And Merlin, I know you have thoughts on it.
Oh, it's true. I'm all like eager about it. Because yes, I agree. I think it's a game changer. So Dataverse for Teams, which was also DataFlex Lite for a brief moment.
Or Project
is
Oakdale?
or Project Oaktail before that. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Is like a little baby Dataverse that sits inside a team in Microsoft Teams. And you can do most of the same things with it. You don't get API access to it. I don't think that you can reach into it from outside, from like Power BI, or I'm not sure about Power Automate. I've been meaning to test that and have not yet. But you can build apps and you can build bots. So you can set up a Power Virtual Agent bot to like answer questions from the data that you have in there. And you can build Power Apps on it to get data in, pull data out. And it all, like the entire environment lives just inside one team in Microsoft Teams. And I think the coolest part about this is anybody who owns a team can deploy an environment. Ta-da! There you go. You just like go and say, I want to build an app. And it's like, all right, I'm going to make you a Dataverse. So it just makes one. And then you can just start building on it, and it does not require any extra licensing. So if you've already got a Microsoft Teams license, it's basically still free for you, which I think is a huge game changer, especially if you want to build a bot, because Power Virtual Agent licenses are quite expensive.
So can you give me a use case for this? Because this is one of the parts of Dataverse that I've struggled with, right? It's like, how would you integrate it into a team? When, why? It's one of those concepts that as an admin or a functional person, like I try so hard to stay on top of, but sometimes I just can't conceptualize like how my company would use it.
Right. You're wondering, okay, that's cool, but what's it good for? I guess there's probably something that, say, your team, at your job, your team has something that you're keeping track of. And today, you might be keeping track of it in a SharePoint list or an Excel spreadsheet, like on a shared drive or in SharePoint or even in a team. And that's all well and good, but maybe you want to be able to do a little bit more with that. Like maybe that Excel file is a little bit limiting and you want people to be able to make updates to it, from somewhere else, or you only want to give them access to certain fields to update and you don't want them to mess with the other stuff. You can't really do that easily in Excel. But it would be super handy if you could do it in a Power App, but maybe you don't have a Power Apps license. So now you can say, well, in my team, I'm going to deploy Dataverse for Teams. I'm going to build a Power App. I'm going to put all my Excel or SharePoint-based data in there. And then my users can interact with it in the apps just within my team. So it's like a replacement for the spreadsheet or the Access database or whatever. Sorry. Go ahead.
But do you see a scenario where you already have D365 CE deployed like Ashley does, and like you could just put it there and you already have the licenses? And like, do you see a scenario where you have that situation and you use Dataverse for Teams? Or do you think it's only for companies that don't want to pay for the full D365 license?
I think it could still make sense. It might not make sense for Ashley's team because Ashley is a CRM admin, right? And she can just build it out if she wants to. But maybe it makes sense for, I don't know, the HR department or the sales team or some other group that doesn't have access to just build whatever they want in Dynamics and doesn't want to get the approval from Ashley to build it into Dynamics, right? Because she could say, no, I don't want that data.
I love being talked about like I'm not here. That's awesome. No, but I can see use cases for that because maybe there are people that don't need full access to Dynamics, but there's data in there that they would need access to or be able to like do functioning on, right? Like they have to, like their job depends on the data that's in there, but they only need to read it. They only need to see it once a week or whatever. I could see maybe that being an example of how this could be used when you already have a Dynamics environment.
Right. I mean, here's a good example. Here's a good example from my previous employer that I think would fit well into Dataverse for Teams is an RFP response library, right? You get RFPs and you have to answer all the same questions all over again, but they're always asked in slightly different ways. And so it would be super handy if you had a place to list all of that stuff and then an easy way to search for it, right? So what most people do. I just put it all in a Word document, and then you do, Control F and search for keywords, or you put it in Excel and you do the same thing. Or you could put it in Dataverse for Teams and then build a bot on top of it, and then you just ask the bot questions, right? Okay, I'm looking for like licensing details, and the bot will be like, oh, yeah, I found these 4 different results. And then you could use that as an easy way for users to say, oh, like this is a much better experience for finding and maintaining this data than like a Word document sitting in SharePoint that I then have to go in and like remember to update when I get a question that wasn't in there.
But it is separate databases, like they're separate environments, right? Like you couldn't deploy like Dataverse for Teams in a team and pull data from your existing D365 environment. Like they're completely separate, right?
They are completely separate. You might be able to move data back and forth with Power Automate. Like I said, I'm not sure. I feel like I need to test that out because generally Dataverse for Teams there's no API access. But yes, they are separate. I will point out that if you build a bunch of stuff out in your Teams version and you realize, actually, I need to be able to get to this from the API, you can upgrade it.
Oh, that's nice.
So you can upgrade it into a full Dataverse and it'll just sort of promote itself.
So you don't have to start your build over.
Right. Obviously,
really nice.
You need licensing for that, but yeah, it's not like you're building stuff into a dead end and then you're like, I gotta migrate my data out.
So in that way, it's better than a spreadsheet.
Right, because you have options to grow.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ashley.
No, I was going to say, like you mentioned the RFPs. If people have questions on those, please go back to our partner podcast because we very much share our opinions on that. That's all I was going to say. If that example is actually a good example.
True.
Go ahead, Liz. I'm sorry.
No, yeah. I was just going to say, like, I really view it as kind of the spreadsheet replacer. Like, I think so many organizations still collect data and have processes that rely so heavily on the spreadsheet. I mean, Excel is great. Like you can do a lot in Excel, right? But I think this is kind of the more modern, robust, like this new era of Excel, in my opinion. Yeah. And it's an easier leap than like going to a full D365 or Dataverse XRM implementation.
And I think that's huge because that's like something that sales managers always complain to me about, being at a it's a functional, hey, it's great that we have Dynamics, but we have all these other spreadsheets, can we replace them? And some of them, it just doesn't make sense. So I think that this is a pretty cool feature. Definitely something I'll be looking into in use cases where I work.
Yep. And like I said, it's free. So it doesn't hurt to try.
Yeah. I'm curious to know what it's like doing all the work within Teams.
Yeah. That is kind of one of the restrictions is you have to like build everything within the Teams.
Well, I know what it's like, trying to work on a Word document or an Excel document within Teams. And so that's something that I would be slightly concerned about until I try it, just how smooth and how fast is that process?
I mean, I think it's still the same like Maker Portal experience. It's just all embedded in Teams.
Right. That's what
but is it slow or is it fast? Because we've had some honest opinions about the Maker Portal. My other question for that is has to do with like you can give access then to everybody, right? Or anybody that would need access because there's no limit to a team. I guess that's the question I always get to is, are there limits to the amount of people or type of people you can have on a team?
I don't think so. I feel like there is some sort of limit on teams but I don't think that there's any limit. If you can add people to the team, then they can get access to the apps.
You do max out on Teams, so I think you can only have, I would have to research it, but I want to say 1,000 teams or something like that, and then you do run out of teams. It's like 500 or 1,000.
It's 500.
500.
Yeah. And I know that this is a point of concern for larger organizations because Teams itself will let you have like, I think it's like 10,000 different teams, right? And obviously in most environments, I think by default, anybody can just create a team. Mm-hmm. So if you want to, you just go into your Teams environment. Oh, I'm just going to create a new team. Oh, great. I'd like to add some apps to this. Oh, now you have a Dataverse for Teams environment, right? But now from an administrative and governance perspective, if you can only have 500 of those environments, but anybody can make one, And if enough people just go and play with it and make one, eventually you're going to run out, right? And so
Yeah.
I know that's a concern.
I feel like at a large enterprise, you wouldn't allow everyone just to be able to create one. Like you'd have to have some restriction because of that issue. Like I think that isn't a problem for a small company though. Like let's say you only have
Right.
20 or 30 employees. Like it's highly unlikely that you're ever going to hit that limit.
It's true. But I think on the flip side, as the administrator, you can still see all the environments in the Power Platform admin portal. So you'd be able to identify who's using up all your orgs. But also, I don't actually know that this is a great solution for a big enterprise. Legitimately, because there isn't that level of control in governance, and because you don't get external API access to it, it is my belief that a larger enterprise organization is going to find that too limiting, and they're going to be more willing to invest in one or multiple Dataverse, like full Dataverse environments, to solve a variety of business problems, right? Because they're going to want to maintain more governance and control over that. So I'm not actually sure that this is as exciting for big organizations as I think it is for small organizations. Because I think for a small company, now you can finally solve small problems quickly, easily, cheaply, and get all of the benefits, or most of the benefits, that the broader Dataverse platform gives you at a much lower cost of entry. And you can kind of build it up over time.
I agree.
I think my only other concern there is like the development experience you'd have to create the app. Like I know that we're talking like, oh, anybody can go in there and create that environment, but do they actually have the knowledge and skills to be able to create that app? And, is that a learning curve as well?
I mean, sure, that'll be a learning curve as well. I guess to that point, I will say that the content on the Microsoft Learn portal is pretty solid. Does a good job of walking people through things. From my own perspective, personal plug, I'm putting together a Power Platform bootcamp.
I knew you were going to say that.
Of course.
How long was it going to take?
I mean, Ashley just teed it up so perfectly.
That wasn't planned.
So I am putting together a Power Platform bootcamp to do exactly that, actually, to take the business power user who doesn't know anything about how to build apps and give them a foundational set of knowledge so that they can jump in.
And I think it's those real life examples. Like I kept asking, like, well, what's the use case for that? This all great, like sounds great. Or, when Microsoft comes out with the marketing documentation, you read it and you're like, wow, this is so cool. But then you go back to your company and you say, well, gosh, how could I actually implement this? Or like, what use case would we want to use this in? I think that's, a struggle, I think, with anything new that comes out with Microsoft or the Dynamics world.
Yeah, I know. It's generally true. And the marketing material all makes it sound like, oh, it's amazing. And then such and such company built this cool thing. And you're like, well, that sounds cool, but I don't run a pub in England, so I'm not really sure how that applies to my business. Sorry.
Or you're not a large enterprise customer, so you might not have the dollars to spend on something. So how can you make it scalable for your company?
Right.
Well, we're right about time. Any last thoughts on like Dataverse and kind of how it's changing the world of Power Platform and Dynamics?
I mean, I think that right there, it's changing the world of Power Platform and Dynamics. I think it's very exciting, and I think it's the future. So that's why I'm pushing for Power Platform first, and Dataverse is obviously the foundation of that. So, Liz?
We can leave it at that.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone. Have a great week.
All right, see ya.
Thank you for listening to the Dynamics Hot Dish podcast. For additional content and previous episodes, check out our website at dynamicshotdish.com, follow us on Twitter at dynamicshotdish, and subscribe to our podcast for notifications. Thanks. See you next time.